Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. We are starting our weekend off right. Watches are on the breakfast table. Everything you see here is for sale, and reach out to me, tmosso at thewatchbox.com, with your purchase or pricing questions about any watch you see here. Buy, trade, or sell. And if you wish to sell, we are always looking to build inventory. One watch for an entire collection, no upper limit on value paid, and we wire cash. Again, if you wish to sell a watch, or just receive a quote, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Okay, today's show theme is probably insane watches, but we're going to start with relatively mainstream watches and then gradually work our way up to crazy. So let's start with two natural rivals, the Omega Seamaster Diver 300 meter and the Rolex Submariner. Let's get a little bit closer and discuss these watches, both refreshed since 2018, represent the flagship diving models from their respective brands. Now, of course, the Rolex Submariner was famously redesigned for 2020. It's now a 41mm watch. The Diver 300 became a 42mm watch in 2018. So these watches are very close in function and size. Both from 300 water resistant ceramic bezel inserts, unidirectional bezels. The 300 paired with a longer than average power reserve, 60 in the case of the Omega, 70 in the case of the Rolex. The real difference, and you're going to see this, is in thickness, where the Omega is a good solid 2mm thicker than the Rolex, and it does come across in person, but though it's not quite as obvious when they aren't crystal to crystal. I will say this though, the Omega is 50mm on the nose from lug to lug, and the Rolex is a little bit bigger than that when you include the end links of the bracelet, so they do wind up feeling very similar on the wrist. Now, of course, advantages for the Omega, there are several. First, a display case back for those of you who want to see that for which you've paid. Let's get a little bit closer and take a look at the details. The display case back allows you to see the caliber 8800, which has an exotic coaxial escapement and amagnetic silicone hairspring to the Rolex's anti-magnetic parachrome blue, and it does feature a helium escape valve, which is now profiled like a Reese's peanut butter cut for 2018. So that Reese's-like profile is now a system you can open underwater. Remember, to get this helium escape valve for saturation diving, you will need to buy a Rolex Sea Dweller. So on that basis, advantage Omega. Let's hear the bezel. It's 120 click, and it's a little bit more mechanical and coarse, whereas the Rolex glides, it's a bit more refined. The dial, as you can see, is made of ceramic, distinct from the black lacquer of the Rolex, in that, first, it has that wave pattern that's been famous on these watches since 1993, and second, it's a little bit more scratch-resistant and resistant to tarnishing and water damage over time. The Omega clasp is a bit more involved. As you can see internally, there's a push-button slider with 9.6mm of incremental adjustment, and then you have a fold-out extension, so you actually have both inside the clasp. Let's throw it on the wrist real quick, get a look. We'll do a loom shot with both watch. Take a quick look at that ceramic dial, and you can see zirconium oxide, the formula just below those James Bond style skeleton hands. And it is worth noting, this is a James Bond watch of the 90s, whereas Rolex was the James Bond watch from the 60s through the 80s, and of course the Submariner was the watch. On my wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference. You get a good sense of the Omega's size. It is thicker, there's no doubt about that, but it doesn't wear broader across the wrist, which I find makes it wear just as comfortably as the Rolex, if not quite as razor thin by dive watch standards. Now, rolling over to the Rolex, you can see things are a little bit different. We're going to take a look at that bezel and hear it. There's just no contest. I mean, the Rolex bezel, it is more refined. You're paying considerably more to get this watch at retail, about $9,150 to buy this new. So even if you were to buy it new, you were going to be talking several $1,000s more than the Omega. And when there's about a $4,000 difference between the watches, you should get refinements like a better bezel feel. The dial features a lacquer base, white gold hands and indices. On the Omega, they are rhodium-plated steel, so you have a little bit more luxury in the Rolex. It is thinner in profile, and I'll demonstrate this to good effect. You can really see the thickness of the case. It is quite svelte. Now, throwing it on the wrist, it is also quite comfortable. Take a quick look at the system glide lock that Rolex uses for its adjustable clasp. You can see that there are 10 increments of 2mm, so you have a lot more adjustable sizing than the Omega, where you have just the sub 10mm of slider and then the fold-out extension. Here you have more options. You also have several drilled you can see internally those little drilled stops where you can put the bracelet anywhere from full close to full open. So you can use it for sizing, or you can use it to go all in over a dive suit of some kind. It's very comfortable, it's very flat. You can already see it sits lower on the wrist than the Omega. It's a comfortable and handsome watch. It does give me a little bit more clearance about both sides, because even though the end link does project further out across my wrist, the lug-to-lug dimension here is actually 48 millimeters, so it does both look and wear a little bit smaller than the Omega. Now, of course, this watch is highly anti-magnetic, but it does not have a silicone hairspring. So in that regard, the Omega is going to give you a little bit of an advantage. And at least in terms of lume, I'll let you guys be the judge, but they look very differently at night. Let's take a look and see exactly what I mean. As you can see, they are both very distinctive, but Omega using differential lume for the minute hand and the bezel pearl, so you can more easily distinguish them at a glance when you're viewing this watch at night. You can see both the tips and the shafts of the Omega hands are lumed, and both of these watches use lumed seconds hand, which frankly every dive watch should have. Distinctive feature on the Omega, the skeleton hands. Distinctive feature on the Rolex, the Mercedes-style hour hand. Okay, now obviously these watches are very distinct in their accessibility. This one's rather hard to find, this one's readily available. But if you're willing to pay aftermarket Rolex Submariner money, may I suggest something from the realm of high horology? 42 millimeters and only 10.9 millimeters thick, launched in 2017. This is the Girard Perregaux Laureato Skeleton. Automatic winding caliber 1800, 54-hour power reserve, hand skeletonized movement, and beautifully beveled and satinated on those spare bridges and plates. It is a truly gorgeous watch that is fully lumed, easy to read, and one of the most legible skeleton watches you will encounter. Now you can see the bridges and plates have been finished with a nickel anthracite that creates a dark gray contrast to the white silver of the case. Now the watch, all steel, is nicely finished, and you can see the bezel of the Laureato, always so different from the Nautilus and the Royal Oak, in that it physically threads into the case, and it is a water resistance fixture in its own right. The bracelet is nicely made. You can see the polished bevel along the side, polished centers, primaries in satin finish, and then unlike the Nautilus, you have removable links fixed by screws, and then a trigger actuated double deployant clasp. A very comfortable, secure, flat cushion profile on the wrist. It's important to note that the first Laureato came out in 1975, so it actually predates the Nautilus by 1 year. It's been part of this family of integrated bracelet steel sports watches since the very beginning. Physically imposing, despite its lack of mass and size, it carries the reputation of its brand, and Girard Perregaux is celebrating a rather significant anniversary this year. They are 230 years old if you include the Bout case-making company. Bout was a watchmaker and later case and bracelet maker acquired by Girard Perregaux during the early 20th century. And so when you combine their heritage, you do get 230 years of watchmaking for 2021. Taking a quick look at the reverse side, it is just as beautiful on the back. And this is not machine finish. This is a comprehensively hand-finished watch. And you can see it in particular where the sharp interior bevels of the rotor meet and create those sharp creases. You'll also note sharp creases all over the skeletonized bridges. So this is a hand skeletonized and hand beveled movement with a lovely turned satin over its surfaces. And it does have a modern free sprung style balance. So this is a contemporary sports watch that's also sports watch water resistant at 100 meters. And I'm going to show you the lume right now. And you can see it is quite well lumed and quite legible whether by day or night. A full-service sports watch, and again, far more water-resistant than any standard non-offshore Royal Oak. This is a timepiece you should be considering if you've got used Submariner money, or if you have new, shall we say, Nautilus or new overseas money, frankly, new Royal Oak money. If you're looking at that kind of watch, you should be considering this kind of watch. It's going to offer you just as much craft art from a brand that is just as revered among true cognoscenti, and I think you're going to get more watchmaking, more finish, more substance for your cash. Now, let's talk about a very different kind of company, the one in the same corporate umbrella as Girard Perregaux. They're both owned by Kering, and this is Ulysse Nardin. The Freak Blue Cruiser, 45 millimeters in white gold. It is a carousel tourbillon, and this model debuted at Basel World 2014. A follow-up to 2013's Freak Cruiser, this 45mm bruiser is the first water-resistant Freak. Previously, they were completely intolerant of even splashes and rain. This one is 30 meters, and that's a big breakthrough because you can wear it with a little bit of abandon if you go out on a potentially soggy day or you happen to splash your watch while washing your hands. Now, the Freak has always been a superb example of different, shall we say, offbeat concepts, offbeat thinking, but brilliant execution. Now, the first one back in 2001 introduced two of the features you see here, which is Bezel Setting. You open the lock at 6 o'clock, and then you use the bezel to set the watch. Now, what we have here is actually not a tourbillon. It is what's known as a carousel tourbillon. The carousel tourbillon is a system invented by Bonne Bonnickson, a Dane, in the 1890s. And the carousel is like a tourbillon. It rotates the escapement and the balance. But unlike a tourbillon, it has two separate drives. One drives the escapement and one drives the carriage. That's why I can move this carriage without crashing the escapement. You might wonder, how is it that I can move the mechanism around if the drive were singular for both the carriage and the escapement? And the fact is, I could not. So with the carousel, I have that separate drive for the carriage, and I can manipulate that without crashing the escapement, without revving it up or slowing it down as I move the full baguette-style movement. So you have that same rotation and gyration of the escapement, but it's the entire platform that's moving rather than just the balance in the escapement. Now you can see twin silicone escape wheels. It's free sprung with an anti-magnetic silicone hairspring. The escapement is completely unlubricated, and UN makes its own silicone through its subsidiary Sigitech that it bought back in 2006. You can also see, for aesthetic reasons, the company is using sapphire crystals that are clear rather than synthetic rubies to give this watch a cooler look, a little less contemporary, a little bit more avant-garde. Now, this is a loomed watch, and I will show you the loom, but you can appreciate the incredible depth of the carousel tourbillon, which allows you to easily view it from any angle. And if you're wondering how you tell the time, you can see the hour hand below. The minute hand is one and the same as the movement, so you're looking at 11:10 right now. Now, of course, the watch also features the UN corporate color blue to remind you that during the 19th century and early 20th century, Ulysse Nardin's reputation was built upon its marine chronometers. Through the case back, you can see the mainspring, and you wind the watch. This is the second innovation I mentioned. You wind the watch using the case back. The power reserve is 7 days, so it's got long legs, and it features a full deploying clasp. Throw it on the wrist. I wouldn't recommend it for a wrist much smaller than 16 or 17 centimeters circumference. You can see on my wrist it fits, but I don't think you'd want to wear it on a wrist smaller than my 16 centimeter circumference wrist. It is a mighty machine. It does have quite a bit of mass. It's fairly thick, though not encumbering. I would recommend that you wear this timepiece with formal attire or informal attire, but I will say this, it's probably not going to clear the absolute tightest of dress sleeves, but you should be fine with the jacket. Let's do a quick loom shot to better explain this dial. This is the iconic watch of Ulysse Nardin, and the watch, I should mention, is the single model most frequently associated with the brand and its most famous ever horological innovation, combining ideas from Pierre Gigax, Ludwig Axelin, and Carol Forestier-Casapi, who was laterly famous as the leader of Cartier's fine watchmaking. This is just a special watch that combines the best threads of their ideas and Rolf Schneider's ambition, the former owner, of course, of Ulysse Nardin, Rolf Schneider's ambition to create watches like nothing else. What could be better than a Duelment? Duelment. That's right here. Two 42mm Jaeger LeCoultre Duelment, a chronograph, a timepiece launched in 2007, first in 300 pieces in yellow gold. This one, probably my second favorite Duelment after the black dial white gold limited edition. You have a lovely granular eggshell dial with a handsome pebbly texture. You can see that there are hands in yellow gold for telling the time, and then in fired blue for the chronograph functions. You have a foudroyant chronograph. You have center seconds for the time and also center seconds for the chronograph. You have a mono counter with your hours and your minutes for the chronograph with a scrolling single-digit minutes disc, and then two power reserve indicators for the two separate power reserve barrels. 50 hours power reserve. The Duelment has two barrels, two drivetrains, and it has one anchor for both movements, so one regulator turning each one on and off in sequence. There's a column wheel actuator for the chronograph, and the key here is that when you double the power demand on the chronograph, you also double the power supplied with the second barrel. As a result, this is the only chronograph that's capable of maintaining both power reserve and balance amplitude when the chronograph is actuated, and for good measure, it is a lovely mono piano pusher that's a wonderful piece of theater to reset. The case is handmade, and this is a lavishly handmade case with the lugs slotted into slots on the side of the case and then welded on with all evidence of the weld removed by hand, and you can see then double finished with polished lug profiles and a satinated mid-case. In many ways, this watch is like a Longa, both in shape and case construction, but there's a third way, and that's in the way the movement is built and finished. You can see that German silver material. Since we're in Switzerland and this is the Vallée du Jeu, we're not going to call it German silver, it's known as Maillot, and it is that nickel copper zinc alloy with the copper giving it that golden hued color, just like a vintage pocket watch that would have used the same material. You can find both black polished and fired blued screws here, and the Duelment finish includes a mirrored anglage and a Côte de Soleil radiating out from the balance. That's a higher grade finish than you'll find on any other JLC watch priced below $100,000. Now this is a very special timepiece and I adore it, and JLC wasn't pinching pennies back then, so the strap is one of the finest they spec, and it comes with a full deploying clasp rather than a pin buckle. Today some Duelments do come with a pin buckle, and I find that regrettable. Here, no expense spared, and you can even see that the movement architecture is based on a 1881 minute repeating chronometer pocket watch from the JLC Heritage Gallery that was built on a Victorin Piguet a Bausch, and that had the same dual train design for the same reason. Now, if you want something that's even more exclusive, allow me to present the Platinum Duelment Chronograph Boutique Edition, which features a lovely silver white dial. The standard Platinum featured a gray granular dial. This one is silver white with the same granular texture, and in Platinum, the watch truly is an absolute awe-inspiring thing in the hand. The case is made the same way, but because Platinum is more difficult to finish, the stakes are higher and the result is more impressive. And if you want that movement, take heart. Caliber 380 is mechanically the same in both of them, and once again, you get a full deploying clasp, albeit here in white gold, as that is what JLC has paired with Platinum watches since 2006. It works the same way. It has the same wonderful piece of theater when you reset the chronograph, and again, it has the same double power reserves, and it's probably the smoothest winding watch you will ever encounter. And even look at the crown. The crown has a raised and relieved chapter ring and polished JL logo, media blasted center, and then double knurling. It is a tactile pleasure to operate. This watch is next level. If it said Richard Mille on the dial, it would be $1 million watch. For that matter, I can't think of any brand, including Grubel Forsey, that wouldn't be proud to offer a timepiece like this, one of the most innovative chronographs of the 21st century. Let's talk about two in a familiar hue, starting with this. 2019 50-piece limited edition in steel. This is the H. Moser & C Pioneer Perpetual Calendar month date with burgundy fume dial, 50 pieces made, 42.8 millimeters in steel, and 120 meters water resistant, automatic winding, and manual winding. The other one's automatic. You'll see that in a moment. Manual winding with a movement that has a 7-day rated, though in reality about 9-day long power reserve. An absolutely spectacular piece. You can see the burgundy dial rearranges the Andreas Streller designed perpetual calendar system that Moser uses. So instead of a stick index pointing to an hour, you instead have a month and a date, and you will note that I can set it in either direction, and I can set it in either direction while driving the month with the calendar. And that's the thing, you can't damage the calendar by setting it at the wrong time of day, and it is bi-directionally adjustable, so it's actually year 2100 proof. Now, it's still a perpetual calendar, and thanks to Andreas Streller, it's still a very neat and understated system with the leap year phase indicator hidden on the case back. All of this is loomed, and the timepiece features a power reserve indicator. Once again, advertised power reserve 7 days, reality about 9. Stop seconds, full balance bridge with a free sprung index for toughness. You have a mainspring barrel set in golden chaton fixed by screws with a 3/4 style bridge architecture, nods to the pocket watch era of Moser watchmaking. And then you can also see that the hairspring is an overcoil, Moser making its 14 karat gold escapement, its balance wheel, and its hairspring in-house. At its subsidiary Precision Engineering, you might ask, why 14 karat gold escapement? Lower friction, increased precision, and longer power reserve. Zoom out a little bit, throw it on the wrist. You can see this burgundy dial is quite handsome, and the watch fills up my wrist. I probably wouldn't recommend it for wrists smaller than 15 centimeters circumference because it is a big watch, but it does have fairly stubby lugs, and you can see that characteristic Moser case design. They always machine their cases and then hand finish, which is how you can get these deep, detailed recesses within the lugs. That's not something that can be done with mass-produced stamped cases, so Moser always doing things the right way. Technically ambitious and easy to read. The complexity is on the reverse side, the simplicity simplicity is on the dial side. Although here, for 2020, Moser did make some changes. This is the H. Moser & C and MB&F 15-piece 42mm stainless steel Endeavour cylindrical tourbillon. So 15 pieces made with this lovely burgundy metallic fume dial that fades from bright burgundy at its center to black at its edge. Note, both of these watches feature that color, but the tourbillon features a more dramatic fume fade. Now 42mm, you can also see it's remarkably thick thanks to a domed bubble-like sapphire crystal, and the dial itself is driven by bevel gears, and it is itself constructed of sapphire. Now the watch is designed to be worn two different ways. You can see that the crown is on the left side when you are wearing it conventionally with the dial facing you. That's all well and good, but if you set the watch upside down, that is, you set it to the inverse of the current time, you can actually wear the watch with the tourbillon facing you, and then you can read the time at a glance. Now the tourbillon is something special, so I'm going to zoom in here. We say cylindrical tourbillon. What we really mean is that there is a flying tourbillon with exceptional height. It has no upper bridge to block your view. It's a 1-minute tourbillon at 21.6 beat rate, and as I mentioned earlier, this is the automatic version of the Moser movement architecture with a 3-day power reserve in spite of the power-intensive tourbillon. You can also see the cylindrical hairspring. Now you can see it features 2 overcoils, one at both ends, and the cylindrical hairspring is a signature of mostly marine chronometers, which took advantage of the perfectly centered mass of the cylindrical hairspring, and the result was better timekeeping. Well, Precision Engineering, I mentioned them, they make balances, escapements, and hairsprings. They also made this hairspring. As they were a supplier to MB&F through previous collaborations, they consummated the relationship by including this hairspring in a dual-branded watch that is both Moser and MB&F. So you can see that there is a Moser case, the Endeavour case, with those lovely sculpted sides, a combination of black polish and satination and that Endeavour bezel that's all concave in profile and expands at 6 o'clock and at 12 o'clock. Of course, I mentioned automatic winding, and it is a robust system. If you look at the underside, it's a magic lever style bidirectional winder that's quite tough. You have one of those jewels set in chaton. It is a single barrel movement. Then you have a bearing for the underside of the tourbillon, giving it a wide base on which to brace and ceramic bearings for reduced friction. You can also see, and we're going to do a loom shot here, that this dial is fully loomed and something of a feat. A remarkably good-looking watch and a striking dial by night in steel with full loom and automatic winding. This is a surprisingly practical tourbillon regulator. Now, as you know, I'm a great fan of de Bethune, and I love the watches unconditionally. These are the watches that I would buy with my own money when I get back into collecting. And what we have here is a spectacular DB25 Moonphase Starry Sky, 44mm in white gold and still quite slim in profile. It uses the DB25 lug structure, which is more conventional than the floating lugs that made de Bethune famous in the modern era. And for a lot of folks, this is going to be a more accessible and acceptable watch with a dial that, although extravagant, is conventionally solid, not open-wrought. And you can also see that with the standard lugs, it doesn't look as avant-garde on the wrist. We'll throw it on my wrist. It's just over 51mm lug to lug, and it wears quite easily. You can see it's flat. It looks thick, but it's actually a flat watch. Now, the DB25 is probably the more approachable de Bethune collection. You can see this one features a full fired blue titanium dial with a toroidal ring for the hours outboard featuring polished cabochon. You can see that all of this blue is created by firing. It's a process that watchmaker Denis Flageolet created for de Bethune and patented. So this is their own proprietary method. You can also see that the Moonphase is a full sphere of 1/2 blued steel, 1/2 white palladium with an adjustment interval of 122 years. Not only do we have this fired titanium dial, but we have little cabochons that have been pressed into holes in the dial to create the image of the celestial bodies of the cosmos. Those are all little globes of white gold. You can also see de Bethune does a lot of custom work. This one features a little man riding a rocket and the initials CP of the original owner of the watch. You can see when you zoom out, it's not readily apparent. It's not intrusive in any way. It's just wonderful, fun, and funky acknowledgement of the watch's history, much like personalized engraving on a vintage pocket watch. Turn it all over and things get crazy. This caliber right here the 2105, features full black polished plate and bridges. And I don't mean a black polished screw. I don't mean a black polished swan's neck regulator. I mean the entire movement has been black polished and finished off with diamond paste. The barrels are self-adjusting. They're lined with sapphire for minimal internal friction. They're patented. Triple shock protection, known as triple parachute, patented. Silicon disc with a white gold rim, patented balance. Bi-element dog leg hairspring that beats concentrically like an overcoil without the thickness of an overcoil, patented, and de Bethoon's own silicon escape wheel. All of this with a manual wind 6-day power reserve and a very subtle 6-day power reserve indicator at the base. Note that the fine finish is very traditional, spectacular but traditional, as we have broad mirrored anglage on the edge of the barrel bridges, satination and solarization on the wheels and barrels, and then of course we have a frosted base plate and abundant mirror polishing. The triple shock protection system also makes this watch surprisingly tough, as it has shock protection springs based on a steel spring architecture that goes over the barrel bridge. You can see it anchors each edge of the balance bridge, and this is to better relocate the balance staff after shocks and concussions. A spectacular watch with a white gold pin buckle. De Bethoon, I should mention, has made fewer than 3,000 watches since its founding in 2002. De Bethoon makes its own cases, its own hands, its own dials. Everything is in-house for the 150 watches per year that it manufactures. If you ask me what's the finest watch you can buy for the money, it's this. Now, also in the canton of Vaud, in the traditional French-speaking Watch Valley, Audemars Piguet of Les Brassus. And here we have an extravagant and extreme take on the Royal Oak offshore chronograph. In full yellow gold, the circa 2016 blue dial yellow gold offshore on full bracelet is one of the most monstrously impressive things I've ever encountered. First of all, the weight is incredible at over half a pound. The timepiece, all yellow gold, and rare for an offshore, a full bracelet. Yellow is the boldest and oldest of golds, and its impact, it's almost like seeing a parking lot full of Ferrari supercars. That's what it's like to see so much yellow gold. And by integrating the bracelet rather than implementing a strap, Audemars Piguet reclaims the integrated design of Gerald Genta's original Royal Oak, but with the style, flair, and proportions of Emmanuel Guet's immortal Royal Oak offshore design. We have a ceramic set of pushers and crown shoulder, and then a dial that is metallic blue with yellow gold registers. The timepiece with a 50 to 55 hour automatic winding power reserve and 100 meters of water resistance is more readily soakable than a standard offshore, which generally comes with a hornback alligator leather strap. On a full bracelet, this one is ready to use its 100-meter water resistance to the fullest extent. And you can see it's thick, though it's not monstrously thick. It's more broad across the wrist, and I'll be honest, the watch wears more like a 44 or a 45 millimeter conventional round watch. It is beautifully hand finished. If you look at these bevels, the satination, the break between the bezel top and the bezel flank, even the fact that these little details have been both polished and satinated. You can see that polished bevel around the end of the chronograph pusher. Everything here is just superb. The coats of arms of the Audemars and Piguet family, reminding you that AP is still owned and run by its founding families from 1875. Full balance bridge with a free-sprung index for shock resistance, 59 jewels, 365 parts. It's an AP base caliber 3126 with the Dubois de Praz 3840 vertical clutch chronograph module for smooth engagement and reliable running. This watch has got it all going on. Let's take a look at Lume. In my book, a sports watch should be swimmable, automatic, and loomed, and this watch qualifies on all three counts. Let's take another look at a very different kind of full bracelet sports watch, all in platinum, 44 millimeters, with what I believe to be FP Journe's most attractive dial, the blue mauve, or sometimes described as the purple mauve. This is the Line Sport Octasport from the latest no rubber bumper 44 millimeter production. You can see it features a matching blue mauve ceramic bezel insert, and then a dial that includes a number of flourishes, including a lovely media blasted bezel for the sub-seconds. There is a day-night indicator at approximately, we'll call it 750 on the dial, red for night, silver for day. The power reserve is indicated as 120 hours. That's the chronometric or precise power reserve. If you want the watch to just run to exhaustion, it will run for 160 hours before it stops, but it keeps best time for 120 hours. You have a double-digit date with a quick set. Note the flush fit date wheels, very difficult to accomplish. And also take note that the individual numerals for the hours, they are actually applique white gold, and the hands at center are media blasted white gold, just like the numerals. It is a very thin watch. We had my calipers here before. You can see only 10.5 millimeters thick and beautifully made. You can see without the bumpers, it is a lot more upscale in appearance. I like the bumpers, but you guys asked, FP Journe answered, and the bumpers are gone. A cleaner look. You can also see that the frosted finishing, which is achieved by micro chiseling, is simply exquisite. The time required to create this bracelet and case must be extraordinary, and I never tire of details like this. The clasp itself is remarkably robust. Journe building his clasps, his bracelets, his dials, his cases, and of course his movements in-house. And the architecture of the movements is something special, because here we have a full platinum watch on a full platinum bracelet with a full rose gold movement. The rotor is 22 karat, the bridges and plates are 18 karat. It's free sprung for toughness, adjusted in 5 positions, again 160-hour absolute duration power reserve, and nicely finished. Journe movements, though, mostly mechanical in nature and how they're finished. They look more and more convincing as manually finished movements with time. So a judicious blend of mechanical and manual finishing, but over time these are becoming more convincingly high horology movements, not just because of what they're made of, which is gold, but also because of how beautifully rounded and mirrored, for example, the bevels now are. Those have gotten a lot better through the years on FP Journe watches. Throwing this watch on the wrist, you can see it's not quite as large as the offshore, although on paper this is a 44 and that's a 42. This wears nothing like the offshore. It's super flat, it's narrow across the wrist, and if your wrist is as small as 14 centimeters circumference, you're going to find that this watch wears really well. It also slips easily underneath the cuff. As you can see, it just isn't that thick. And again, with a really long power reserve, this is a great watch for a collector with a large collection who might rotate through his collection on a weekly basis. And this watch is fantastic for that without requiring constant resetting. But if you want a more traditional Journe watch, albeit with the same degree of wrist presence, may I recommend the FP Journe Quantième Perpétuel, a timepiece 42 millimeters in platinum. The watch was launched in 2015. The 42 millimeter case came in 2016, and this one features a white gold matte finished center dial with the polished silver steel bezel known as the clover dial. There are 2 different versions. This is the clover. The other one doesn't have the bezel. I actually prefer the look of the bezel. And you can see in the 42 millimeter case, this dial breathes a little bit better than it did in the 40. It feels less confined and less constrained. The perpetual calendar system is brilliant, as you can make all of the adjustments without any push or adjuster tools. Journe wanted to get rid of the little adjuster dimples on the flank of the case, and he wanted it to be settable without using tools. So he allowed certain functions to be adjusted from the crown, like the day and the date, but then he also included a little pusher, and I don't quite have the nails to recover it, but I'll do my best here. I manicure obsessively for you guys, and you can actually adjust the month using this little flush fit hideaway pusher, so everything can be adjusted without tools. Once again, we have a Octa caliber 1303 in its latest version, 160-hour power reserve, a unidirectional winding for smooth and efficient action, and a rose gold movement with a white gold dial and a platinum case. Yeah, you better believe it's pretty hefty. It's about 51.4 millimeters lug to lug, though it's under 11 millimeters thick, so it's an easy watch to wear under a cuff. It's not thick, but again, I mentioned, just like the sports watch, a lot of wrist presence, and just like the sports watch, this is a brilliantly inventive piece. So you don't need to adjust it until the year 2100. Leap years, irregular length months. As a perpetual calendar, it fears none of those. Now, if you're old school and old money, perhaps you want something a little bit more established, and you want an automatic perpetual calendar all the same. Well, back in 2008, Audemars Piguet launched this watch, 41 millimeters in platinum. You can see it is an individually numbered and hand-engraved 90-piece limited edition, and it was celebrating the 30th anniversary of the seminal reference 25548, the first automatic perpetual calendar from AP, and the one that really helped to keep the lights on during the late 70s and early 80s, recapitulating AP's dedication to mechanical and complicated mechanical watchmaking, and also proving to be a bestseller during a period when quartz was thought to be the natural successor. Well, this watch harks back to that original with a movement that's almost identical, but a larger platinum case. Now, I've mentioned this welded lug construction, and you can really see it here. The case is only 9.2 millimeters thick, so very, very thin, this 30th anniversary piece. The lug's obviously welded on, double finishing, both polish and satin, very impressive. This was ahead of the curve back in the 2000s, and this was a 2008 piece. Blue generally meant some sort of special edition. If you saw a blue dial, You knew it was something special, and it was probably platinum. Polished chapter rings, lovely cruciform symmetry to the registers, leaf-style hands, baton-style hour indices, leaf hands as well as indices in white gold. And then under the reverse side, we have the caliber 2120/4 and the 2802 perpetual calendar module. First, note how beautiful AP's rotor used to be. You can see it's been freehand engraved, it's been skeletonized by hand, and then it's been beveled internally, such that we have these sharp outward angles between the A and the P. You can see them on that triple point, as well as sharp inward angles where two bevels meet. AP now uses a largely machined rotor, even on this caliber, which is a famous heritage piece and usually high horology finish, and it still is today, but it doesn't have this rotor, which is a work of art in its own right. The rest of the movement is based on the 1967 JLC 920 Bausch, which was designed on commission for AP, Patek, and Vacheron. Today, the movement's made in-house by AP and still used. You can see there's a beryllium ring that runs all the way around the movement. There's a single-sided mass, but the ring runs all the way around. It pivots on 4 ruby rollers, so though it's thin and sunken close to the base plate and the bridges, it can never come in contact with them due to shock. It's been upgraded with a Gyromax-style free-sprung balance. You can see that the grade of the beveling here is to a higher degree than other AP movements, like, say, the 3120, the 4401, or the 4302. The Côte de Genève are rich and beautifully gradient-crested, so they're laid down by a abrasive wheel rather than stamped. And then you can see satination on the wheels, solarization on the crown and ratchet wheel, perlage on the base plate. This is a very, very special watch. And as I mentioned, the case back details, like, for example, the serial number and the edition number, here they have been freehand engraved with a burin rather than executed with a lathe or a drill. Very impressive stuff. The Jules Audemars 40e Perpetuel. Absolutely classic. Beautiful, flat, and short across the wrist, slipping easily under a cuff. It's even thinner than Journe's watch, and you can see it's short across the wrist at less than 48 millimeters from lug to lug, making it suitable even for a small wrist. Very impressive stuff. And we end with a crazy watch. The recipient of 3 GPHG awards. This is the 2013 stainless steel 55-piece limited edition Uhrwerk EMC. Electromagnetic control. For the first time ever, Uhrwerk gives you the ability to both read the rate of your watch the way a watchmaker would on a chronoscope and adjust the watch yourself. Now, it's difficult to describe its size other than it's not as big as it looks. It's a little over 13 millimeters thick, 49 millimeters lug to lug, and as I measure it without some of these outward flourishes, it's 41.5 millimeters across. As you can see, the pivot centers of the strap are actually slightly inboard at the end of the case, so it wears even smaller. You can see the crown, you can see the individual numbering, you can see the retractable generator. There's a Maxon generator built in. This is a component built by a company that also supplies NASA. As you crank it, typically takes about 7 to 10 cranks. The Maxon generator energizes a capacitor. The capacitor, in turn, activates a microprocessor and an optical sensor, which you can see through the reverse side of the caliber EMC. Now, it's a completely mechanical movement. It can run without any electrical charge. It is not timed by a quartz regulator, but you can see the optical sensor on top of the balance, and then the microchips and the integrated circuits that actually calculate the instantaneous timing rate of your watch. So we have the time, we have the seconds, it does hack. We have the chronoscope that gives you the rate of the watch up to plus 20 seconds, up to minus 20 seconds. And then we have a power reserve indicator for the 80-hour power reserve, and you can see the case includes both media blasting and satin finish externally. Let's fire up our chronoscope. And you can see I need to run this watch a little bit. Sometimes when the watch has been sitting a bit, it runs slow. The timepiece features a chronoscope that is fully loomed, so you will see in a moment. We'll fire this up again. When the lights are off, it has spectacular lume. Now, this is a remarkably well-machined piece. You would think something like this might feel fairly fragile, when in fact this actually feels like it was machined from solid billet. Now, the chronoscope system is a lot of fun to play with, and it will allow you to entertain your friends. There we go. It's been running for a few seconds now. It's getting closer to 0 seconds lost, 0 seconds gained. The EMC caliber is important because most Uhrwerk watches are actually based on zenith movements. So the fact that this is a twin mainspring barrel, a full hand finished, full manufacture 80-hour manual wind power reserve, hacking seconds, high beat movement is very important. Uhrwerk rarely makes its own movements from base plate up, and this one is that. Now you might wonder, what does this little push trigger do? It actually pops the crown out of position, so you can grab the crown now and set the watch and take a close look. It actually hacks the seconds. You'll also appreciate the fact that there is a fine-tuning adjustment mechanism. So Uhrwerk gives you you a little key that comes with the watch, and you can see, we'll get as close as we can, there's a tiny scale, plus and minus, and you can actually regulate the watch to run more slowly or more quickly, depending on, once the watch has been running for a while, whether it indicates time gained or time lost. So Urwerk gives you the ability to actually regulate your watch and the ability to time your watch. You can see Sat Nation on the barrels, Côte de Genève on the base plate, black polished screws. There's also mirrored beveling in there. It does not disappoint. It is everything you imagine in a Grail level watch. And again, the recipient of 3 GPHG awards in 1 year. This is the Urwerk EMC. Let's do a loom shot. There it is right there. Absolutely spectacular stuff. Guys, if you love what you see here, reach out to tmosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.